Okay, Greg McCarran here with the antidote. It is Saturday evening, January 11th, and I just wanted to take a few minutes. I don't want to go terribly long here. Take a few minutes to do a solo audio to follow up on a topic that I've been thinking about a lot over the last week and a half or so. I expressed my thoughts on this at the end of Jeremy and I's show that we recorded on Monday, and I also called into fault lines on Sputnik with Lee Stranahan and Garland Nixon. I was specifically um, bringing this topic up to Lee Stranahan, and that is the topic that people should not be, I guess, I don't know if the term I want to use is surprised that Donald Trump is acting in this manner towards a country such as Iran. And as far as the Iran situation goes, taking out any type of conversation about multipolar nature aspects of whatever's going on here, whether or not the Trump administration actually wants a physical war with Iran. My thought being on the matter that it does not appear to be that way. That there are other methods and means of dealing with Iran, um, whether it would be through maybe internal chaos, taking advantage of internal domestic situations, and perhaps even having agents on the ground to help cause further domestic problems in Iran, which could lead to a demand for some type of major effort within the country to demand for a regime change the U.S. and say maybe Israel and some other countries could take advantage of, or if there's actually an effort and slash or there could be both things could be true at the same time. There could be an effort to move Iran and perhaps steer Iran into a direction where it would be into this what we call this multipolar world. Russia and China with Israel at the center of things, and therefore some tempering of Iran's behavior, Iran's activities in the Middle East, as far as being a primary maybe protector of the Palestinians, a primary protector of Syria, could be managed and tempered at the very least, and that's where an entity such as Russia could step in if we're to um, question the nature of Russia's alliance, so to speak, with Iran. So anyway, taking all of that aside, I called into Fault Lines Radio on Radio Sputnik this past Monday morning, and I expressed to Lee Stranahan, and I specifically directed this at Stranahan because of Stranahan's role as a defender of Trump coming from the right, despite being a critic, at least vocally, publicly, of Trump's um, some of the warlike, you might say, the hawkish tendencies of the Trump administration, combined with Trump's, uh, you know, support for everything Israel. And I brought up to Stranahan. I directed this to Stranahan in particular for a couple of reasons. One reason because he is a continued supporter and defender of Trump, while he might criticize the policies of the Trump administration to an extent, he still runs cover for Trump and acts as if nothing Trump has done is actually wrong, as far as certainly anything going on in Eastern Europe with Ukraine, with Russia, and also acts as if Trump is being manipulated by people to do things, as if he doesn't have any agency over any type of problematic policies that are being pursued by his administration, particularly when it comes to foreign policy and geopolitics. In that manner, it's very similar to Tucker Carlson, who is he's the outlier, so to speak, within like the Republican, conservative, pro-Trump media, as far as being the person who is speaking out against in opposition to the Trump administration's actions in Iran, but it's always framed in this: Mr. President, don't let these advisors, don't let these hawkish neocons drive you into a war that you don't want. And so it's always framed in that context manner of Trump as the well-meaning, victim of neocons and war hawks. Everybody surrounding him is doing all these, giving him all this bad advice, but it's still under the guise of constantly defending Trump, constantly pushing basically the same talking points as everyone else when it comes to certain things like the Russia, the Eastern Europe situation going on, domestic policy, and so it's very similar to Tucker in that regard. Although Stranahan's more openly, you could say, defensive of Russia, working for actual Russian state media, than Tucker Carlson is on Fox News. Although that dynamic is certainly there with Tucker. So anyway, I called into Fault Lines and I told Stranahan that if we are basically, in a nutshell, I said if we are to if we are seriously concerned about what this action that Trump took in Iran, particularly when it came to the assassination when it comes to the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, if we are to condemn this, if we are seriously opposed to this, then we need to be honest about the nature of what the Trump administration represented. And I tried to bring up a combination of the people who got Trump elected, as far as from the propaganda aspects of it, the very problematic Zionist, anti-Iranian aspects of this. I brought up particularly, I mentioned in this phone call, I mentioned Steve Bannon and Cambridge Analytica. I would hope that would strike a chord with Stranahan, as Bannon was Stranahan's former boss at Breitbart, and Stranahan has been publicly very vocally critical of Steve Bannon. I also mentioned Eric Prince and Blackwater, and I mentioned the Israeli group, Psy Group, and the Council for National Policy, the right-wing, very powerful CFR, Council on Foreign Relations style organization that many of the major right-wing conservative movement members belong to, as examples of the types of people and the types of entities that were able to bring Trump to power. And that's when they intervened, as they had to go to a commercial break, and Stranahan basically said he agrees with me, but it's basically Trump's not doing these people's bidding. It's that Trump is being manipulated by these people. They're using Trump for their ends, their means. And you know what? I don't doubt that that's certainly true to an extent. But it also completely, I think, leaves out the actual true nature of this operation, that Donald Trump was somebody who is certainly was used by these people, but also, I mean, Trump was a candidate that was very much groomed by them, and the methods of psychological warfare that were carried out by these various entities, of course, Cambridge Analytica and Breitbart, Bannon being major players in the Council for National Policy, which is very, very extremely influential in the Trump administration, to say the least, after also being similarly influential in the Trump campaign. I mean, Trump was a perfect storm for these people. We got to remember that the reason Donald Trump publicly said he was running for president was because of the Iran deal. The Iran deal was the worst deal in history. And so Trump's hawkish instincts on the war on terror as an idea, maybe not even so much the war on terror actually being carried out as an actual physical war, but the idea of the war on terror. Trump is the biggest manifestation we've had of that yet, of this actual idea of fighting a war on terrorism. So it was a perfect storm for these entities that brought him in. But from the very beginning, even though this support for Trump was not shored up until after the Republican National Convention, when it was obvious he was going to be the candidate to run against Clinton, these goals were very much, this is a match made in heaven, I would say, for these entities and for Donald Trump. And from an Iran perspective, these are the biggest Iran hawks around, you could say. And Trump was, even well before the CN Council for National Policy, Steve Bannon, and the psychological warfare mechanisms of, say, Psy Group and Cambridge Analytica got fully behind Trump. And Trump was already speaking this language as the most vocal opponent, you could say, of the Iran deal and of any types of quote-unquote concessions or appeasement of Iran. So it's very, very obvious what Trump was going to represent from the beginning if we looked at it like this. I mean, I didn't fully understand the Trump deception. I don't know if you want to put it like that, until after the election, although I never was comfortable with Trump, but I was critical of what I saw as all the Iran hawks surrounding Trump even before the election. I mean, when he had the support of people like Giuliani, of course, Michael Flynn, who never seems to make it into the conversation when it comes to people to be blamed for the bad policies of the Trump administration. Flynn gets a free pass for writing a book with Michael Dean, among other things. I guess it's because he's seen as pro-Russia as opposed to Bolton or Mike Pompeo, who are not seen as pro-Russia, or at least as being as pro-Russia. Although I would argue that their geopolitical goals very much align with certain Russian geopolitical policies, such as the rise of far right populism in Europe, among other things, quote unquote populism. But I digress. Flynn always got a pass for these things, I guess, because he's pro Russia and he's not as good of a boogeyman as, say, Bolton or Pompeo are to blame. It's the Trump, we saw what he represented, and when it came to Iran, and it was not going to be good. And as I said, taking all the questions of what the actual administration policy appears to be towards Iran, whether it's an actual physical hot war or I think somebody's talking about a new Cold War. I mean, we're already in a new Cold War with, in some ways, with Iran as this major boogeyman enemy, or else we're either seeing an effort for domestic, for more covert means of actions. Sorry if you hear any noise in the background. It's my dog. She's drinking out of her water, out of drinking water. Anyway, so if you hear any noise in the background, that's what you're hearing there. That's my dog in the background. But anyway, whether it's this push for a hot war or even a cold war, whatever you want to call it, or more covert means of possible regime change in Iran, such as destabilization mechanisms from within, or whether it's just to really manage and contain the Iran in the region via third-party actors such as Russia, in a push to move Iran into what we know as the multipolar world. And so, taking all of that aside, the character of Trump, I mean, it's very obvious what you could see happening with Iran. It's the same reason why you see Trump continuing to do all of these extremely pro-Israel policies that are unprecedented in any other administration. I mean, it seems to me that the assassination of someone like Soleimani, a very, very such a tensious event that's designed to could further ratchet up tensions, regardless of what the noise in the alternative media and much of the pro-Trump community might be. This certainly is ratcheting up tensions in a major, major way. It's just like with the Israel policy, whereas the logical next steps of some of obviously Trump being brought to the presidency by entities such as Breitbart and the Council for National Policy and the psychological warfare mechanisms that were on their hands, such as the Cambridge Analytica and all of that, and then also the global, not just Israel, not just Russia, the global collusion that has been broken down by someone such as Seth Abramson, and also someone like Zev Shalev, I think, is increasingly starting to report on more and more on his narrative website, the global collusion that took place with various actors basically coming together on an international geopolitical perspective to ensure that this election of Trump took place. And so, when you see all this, the logical next step for Trump after being basically brought to the presidency by this combination of international geopolitical interests coming together, as well as the domestic operation through Breitbart and the Council for National Policy and Cambridge Analytica, it was obvious that Trump was going to do things that were provocatively pro-Israel that not even any other president would do, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights as belonging to Israel, giving the green light to unlimited settlement building by Israel, and now most recently the anti-Semitism executive order that Trump signed into place. I mean, with Iran, you see the provocative next steps he was going to take, and people are like, well, Trump's just playing chess, don't worry about it. But I mean, he did get the U.S. out of the Iran deal, which for better or for worse was actually a deterrent against some type of major, I think, and I'm not even necessarily a fan of the Iran deal because there's a lot of issues with that, obviously. But it was seen as a deterrent in a lot of ways from the obviously very aggressive neocon policies towards Iran. And then a logical next step to something like that would be a provocative action like assassinating someone like Qasem Soleimani. So just taking all that aside, it's a very obvious logical progression of a Trump administration. But Lee Stranahan continues to, I think, seems play dumb on this matter and act as if, well, Trump's just he's the he's the choice of the people and he's our president. He's really trying to do good for America, but he's just hamstrung every step of the way by these hawks and these neocons. And that's the problem. And someone like Lee Stranahan, I mean, Stranahan being so involved at Breitbart, brags that he was basically Andrew Breitbart's best friend, or one of his very best friends, if not his best friend, before his death, and also brags about his close friendship with Larry Solov, the CEO of Breitbart, who, of course, was the writer who wrote the article upon the launch of Breitbart Jerusalem titled Breitbart News Network, Born in America, Conceived in Israel, and posted the photo of himself, Larry Solov, with Andrew Breitbart and Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit, a regular guest of and still friend to this day of Lee Stranahan's regular guest on Fault Lines to this day. And then, of course, with those guys in that photo was Benjamin Netanyahu. So Stranahan, I think, knows and understands the depths of the operation to get Trump elected as much as anyone else does. And he never sheds light on it. I mean, he's always going on and on about how certain people within like the pro-Trump obvious Zionist media, Glenn Beck, Dan Bongino, whoever else, they're not being honest enough about how Russiagate is just this plot to undermine Trump and destroy him, when ultimately I can't really see too much of a difference at all in terms of their rhetoric and talking points when it comes to, say, Stranahan and Dan Bongino or Glenn Beck or whoever else. But that seems to be the depths of his criticism, and it's also that Breitbart is very pro-Israel and pro-Zionist. But if Stranahan wants to get to the bottom of the hawkishness against Iran and the obvious extreme pro-Israel sentiments, then it comes down to exposing the true nature of who Donald Trump is and why he was seen as so palatable, such a great candidate for these various entities who, as Stranahan says, take advantage of, which is somewhat of the truth, but it's not the full truth. I mean, people need to know the depths of this operation that was used to get Trump elected, and by playing at the very in good faith analysis, playing dumb, and in bad faith analysis, worse than that. And I tend to go towards the latter, just seeing Lee Stranahan and things he says and how he operates and how he behaves. I tend to go towards the latter. I think Stranahan knows exactly what's going on, but is just not being forthright about it for his reasons. But his refusal to be honest about this, I think, is a major, major problem. And he's not the only one who's guilty of this, but he's one of the most obvious people who's guilty of this. And I think that if he wants to get to the bottom, it's one of the things you also have to address is this long-standing relationship with the Russian global international organized crime syndicate, which operates out of the former Soviet Union. And that's another thing. Obviously, this goes hand in glove with debunking, quote unquote, Russiagate, quote unquote, debunking Russiagate, and portraying anyone who wants to look into Trump's relationships with the global mob or Eastern Europe, which has unfortunately been limited to just the nature of a phone call that was made between Trump and the president of Ukraine. Stranahan joins the rest of the chorus and just treating that as a conspiracy theory by the deep state who just wants to destroy Trump. I mean, to the point that he's willing to, I guess, indirectly work with Rudy Giuliani, it seems like, through this One America News Network documentary and this primary Ukrainian whistleblower who is close to Giuliani, who Stranahan claims that he got in touch with One America News Network. And that relationship, and of course, Stranahan's criticism of One America News Network, it's not at all about the Zionist nature of it or the extremely pro-Trump nature of it or fueling Trump's worst instincts. No, it's that Jack Posobiec works there, and I think his criticism of Posobiec is also very limited, considering they push very much the same talking points on quote-unquote debunking Russiagate, whatever you want to call it, and all of that. So Corsi has, I'm sorry, I'm about to get to Corsi, but Stranahan has that relationship going. He has the continued relationship going with Jim Hoft of the Gateway, I call it Jerusalem Pundit. And then he just recently appeared on Jason Goodman's YouTube channel, Crowdsource the Truth, for with Jerome Corsi on a Christmas live stream. And Corsi, one point, who Stranahan at one point said he refuses to associate with, as of course, he spread conspiracies. This is in Stranahan's words about the death of his best friend or close friend, Andrew Breitbart. I guess a common, desire to defend Trump from all things impeachment and real serious inquiries into the nature of Trump's lifelong relationship with this, this very Zionist, global organized crime mob syndicate out of the former Soviet Union. I guess that's enough to bring Stranahan together with Corsi. And also, obviously, Stranahan's continued defense of Roger Stone as someone who did nothing wrong. And so, I mean, there's these strange bedfellows continue, and Stranahan's just not being honest about the nature of the Trump operation and the depths of it. Even if you believe Trump is being manipulated and taken advantage of, which to a large extent I think his ego is taken advantage of by people. But I mean, it's not honest to just say that and then just not actually delve into the nature of his election, of the events which led to it, and all that was put into that as far as the what was going on, both covertly and right in front of our faces, to get Trump elected, and how Trump was a perfect candidate for these people, and even a serious look into Trump's background and who created him, where he came from, and I think what he's ultimately beholden to. These need to be deconstructed and completely honestly analyzed, and that's not happening. And so that was my reason for calling into Fault Lines and asking Lee Stranahan about this. And that was my reasoning um, for saying this at the end of our most recent Antidote podcast, myself and Jeremy. Then this is we need to understand the true nature. We need to take the mask off of this Trump facade and understand the true nature of what's going on here. And people like Lee Stranahan who want to run defense for Trump while putting out token criticism of his policies, but not even pinning his policies at his feet, rather at the feet of bad advice or bad advisors or whatever. I mean, it's doing a disservice. And I think that, anybody who's seriously concerned about this policy, what this could lead to with Iran and what these provocative actions which have escalated conflict, I think you need to really be honest about this. And if you don't know the facts, I think you need to be, or at least as I see as the facts, I think the strongest argument that can be made for the Trump administration, you got to look at the actual background of the combination of Trump's background coming into the position that he was in as a very powerful businessman and the interests represented there, as well as the operation which was taking place domestically and also globally to ensure his election from a geopolitical perspective. These are the keys to understanding and deconstructing what is going on here right now. And I'm just not seeing anybody do that. And I think that Lee Stranahan is a primary example of this, and one of the best examples I can think of for this. So if you don't have the facts, if you don't see this, I would urge you to strongly, look into this information, look into the information being put out by people like Seth Abramson through his, particularly his most recent book, Proof of uh, Proof of Conspiracy, and also, I would look at Craig Unger and his book, House of Trump, House of Putin. I would look into some of the research being done by researchers like Jay McKenzie and many others. There are a number of very good researchers on Twitter who have put together a lot of threads. I think Zev Shalev is doing good work on this at his website Narrative, the former, I'm not sure if he's born in Israel, but he was definitely Jewish. He's a former executive producer at CBS News. He's been doing some excellent work. There's a number of other people doing excellent work. John Brisson following up on Josh Reeves' work on the Council for National Policy and the Secret Right, what Alex Jones and InfoWars and outlets like that never told you about. Is also key. There's a lot of other people as well. John Swin's done excellent work. I don't know what he's up to now. I hope he's doing well. The world needs this man, John Swin, and I still think Brendan O'Connell's done some of the best work regarding Iran and Trump and some other aspects of the nature. Obviously, Tal Piat and the Russian Israeli relationship, I would recommend. I don't entirely agree with the Johnny Gatz documentary on Russia, recent one he made, Vigilante Intel. There's a lot of other people out there doing all kinds of fantastic work, and I don't want to leave anybody out. But those are just some examples. Obviously, Whitney Webb's written a great series of articles for Mint Press News about the combination of the Epstein operation and the background of that, and not just with the Clintons, but also bringing it into Trump. And by the way, Stranahan, that's another thing he pushes, is the idea that, well, Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago and worked with authorities on helping them with Epstein. And I mean, in that regard, he criticizes Alan Dershowitz and Mike Cernovich for running cover for Epstein, but at the same time, he falls in line with people like that when it comes to the nature of the Trump Epstein relationship. There was nothing to it. But I digress. And that's an example of the great work Whitney Webb has done on Epstein, and also in terms of technological aspects of high tech treason. And although I wish that Whitney would get into the Russian angle on this more, and I don't know if there's issues there with Mint Press News through, and I've laid out my suspicions on that before, and I'm sure I will again in the future. But I would like to see her get into the Russia factor of it more. But I'm glad that she's doing what she's doing. I think she's doing some very important work. So those are just some of the people I can think of who are doing great work. And please don't be mad at me if I didn't mention you. It's because I know there's a lot of great people out there, and I don't mean to omit anyone. Just thought I would name a few names that I've seen that are really at the forefront of putting out a lot of the great research on trying to tie together the actual nature of this Trump operation from a global perspective. And so I guess I'm about to wrap it up here, but I hope people see the need and the importance of not just being critical of Trump's policies, not just saying that we need to stop no war with Iran, anti-war rallies, and all this and activism. That's great, and I think it's certainly well needed. But what we really need to do is deconstruct Trump, and that means to stop running cover for Trump and the Trump operation, and talk about the true nature of what put this man into office, and why he's able to thrive, and why he's so strongly pushing these policies. And certainly, Lee Stranahan is just one example of many of people who are not being honest and forthright about this. And I think it's time to really hold these people's feet to the fire, and to also arm ourselves with the knowledge needed to continue to shed light on the reality of the situation as it is. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm very strong about this, and I will defend my assertions, and I will defend my reasoning for feeling like this to anyone. And I would put mine and Jeremy's analysis, up against anyone else's on this matter. So anyway, I hope everybody got something out of this, and Jeremy and I will be back I'm sure we'll be back doing a regular show, probably recording, I would say, on Monday, most likely. And be on the lookout for some more possible long-term programs in the future. There will definitely be more. I'm not sure when, but just be on the lookout for all that. There's great things coming from the Antidote as we try to make sense of the current geopolitical landscape, current events, and the obvious crazy year to be of 2020. So anyway, everyone, thanks for